dusk. As sunlight departs and the cold of night falls upon the grey graveyard stones, who knows what lingers in the shadows? Is it here that departed souls gather? And is it from a place like this that one or two wander abroad, coming amongst us, seen only by a very few? From time immemorial, people in all four corners of the world have told of ghosts or phantasms, spirits of the departed who most of the time trouble us hardly at all. Where would you go to look for a ghost? An overgrown Victorian cemetery? A fortress like that of the man in the Iron Mask? Among the ruined stones of a medieval castle? But the real thing does not always appear where you might expect. Behind these ordinary curtains dwelt the Enfield poltergeist. These figures appeared in a Spanish bedroom. Who were they? This woman smiles for the camera in Austria, but she wasn't there at the time. Are there ghosts in the gatehouse? And what do they want? And what did this man see in the honeymoon suite? Most people's views on ghosts are based on stories and legends, and Pevensey Castle in Sussex is a fitting place to find a ghost. Lady Joan Pelham, wife of one of the castle's constables, was in command whilst Pevensey withstood a siege at the end of the 14th century. Her anxious ghost still paces the battlements, awaiting her husband's return. The picture book Red Brick Castle at Hurstmonceux has several ghosts. One is of a giant drummer who paces the battlements. Another is of a young girl who appears in the courtyard. The third is of a cloaked horseman who rides into the moat and disappears. Mickleham Priory, parts of which date back to 1229, is just the kind of place you would expect to be haunted.
Well, here at Mickleham we've got several ghosts, but one that I think is 100% genuine. And that is of a lady wearing a grey or greyish blue gown. She was seen to approach the gatehouse here behind me with a dog. And there were two people waiting to pay. The custodian in the kiosk stopped the couple saying, "Excuse me a moment," and turned to the lady with the dog and said, "Sorry, no dogs allowed." She turned round, came back to where we're standing at the moment and vanished. At that point, one of the potential visitors collapsed in a fit of hysteria and fainted, and first aid had to be applied and she was sent home.
Naturally, an old building like Mickleham Priory, once a monastery of Augustinian monks, has many tales attached to it.
I just walked in by the door and this same feeling came over me again. This arm came round my waist and I thought actually it was my husband. I thought he was behind me and I turned round quickly to call him a few silly words, you know, messing about, but there was no Donald.
It was November, some years ago. I found myself entirely alone on the site. Before I left, I went down to the great barn to make sure that the doors were secure. On my way past the front of the house, that top right-hand window suddenly opened. I heard a thud, which made me look up, and there was the window opening with no hand in sight, opening it from the inside. The problem was that it was behind 3 locked doors. The room hadn't been used for some 3 months at least, and it really made my hair stand on end. Fortunately, as I was getting the keys, the chairman came back from his trip into town and accompanied me upstairs. We opened the doors and finally got to that window, which was wide open, and there was no visible means of it having been opened by human touch.
Evidently, many people have experienced ghosts at the old priory at Mickleham. But what exactly is a ghost?
A ghost, I suppose, is an apparition which defies explanation, so that it's not something which is material, but a ghost may be male, female, animal, human, big, small, opaque or transparent. A ghost can be many things, but it's basically something that defies some sort of scientific explanation.
In my opinion, a ghost is a form of electromagnetic energy, according to the experts, between 380 and 440 millimicrons of the infrared portion of the light spectrum. In other words, it is a form of energy that cannot normally be seen by a human eye, can perhaps be seen by clairvoyance, that we don't know, but it is merely a form of electromagnetic energy. You can't do anything, you can't talk to it, and it doesn't come back. Either it is there or it isn't.
And it seems to me that, you know, there are a number of different types of ghosts. You have the sort of a ghost of somebody who that you know and you see, and it comes back perhaps bringing you a message of some sort. Then you have a ghost, which sometimes in parapsychology we refer to as a place image. It's like a photograph that is there, but it doesn't seem to do anything apart from appear to certain people and they can see it. And that's interesting in itself. That's the place image ghost. And then possibly we have a ghost which we could refer to as a crisis apparition. That is, it is only seen, this sort of ghost, when something dramatic or traumatic has occurred. I think one could say that possibly these are the 3 most frequently experienced types of ghosts.
I was once celebrating a Requiem Mass in a house where the family had seen a ghost. Different members of the family, without telling each other, had the same experience. And then they discovered that the people who'd lived in the house before had moved because they had seen the same ghost. And then when they described the ghost, it was fairly plainly someone who'd lived in the house before and had committed suicide there. And so we had a Requiem Mass. We started praying for the soul of the person who died, and with that they appeared. And in fact, we simply carried on with the service, and halfway through, when the point at which we believe the bread and wine become the body and blood of Christ, the person smiled and disappeared, and hasn't been seen since.
Deep in the heart of the New Forest is Bignell Wood. Now lived in by psychiatrist Dr. Kenneth MacCall, the house was formerly owned by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, author of the Sherlock Holmes stories, and an enthusiastic spiritualist.
There are some things left in this house of his, like his bookcase, the stag that he shot in Scotland. There's a garden table. There are some broken up pottery gnomes that he had in the garden. And the previous inhabitants said, oh, well, that wing of the house is haunted, don't sleep there. I thought this was rubbish. I thought rats or owls, probably on the flat roof. So on purpose I put my children to sleep in this end of the house. And they are 5 children, they were 6 to 18 at that time, and they started complaining that this man came and trod on their toys, and he got in the way, big sloppy bedroom slippers, but he didn't hurt anything or knock them over. And he would walk in through a closed door, and he went round the corner and must have gone out the window, but the window wasn't even open. And they chatted this as being quite a frequent and ordinary occurrence, but felt that he was a nuisance. The postman, milkman, these people would never come down the drive because they said it was like a cold chill and they're going to be interfered with in some way. So they always left things at the front gate. The crux came when my eldest daughter, who was now secretary, came down for Christmas from London, and at breakfast time she suddenly said, I had a most interesting night. I've been talking to Conan Doyle. Then she put her hand over the mouth and said, good gracious, yesterday I told you that you were all talking absolute rubbish, but I've seen him and I've heard him, and I woke up and I sat up, and he was in the attic up above me, walking around, and he said, I'm sorry, Elizabeth, I woke you up. I must find my diary. It's black leather with an elastic band round it, and I cannot find it, and it's got to be found so that I can write my memoirs. I'm so glad that you children have come to enjoy this house, because this is where I had all my children, and I want you to lie down and go to sleep again, and I won't disturb you again. At this point I thought, now that's had it. I'm going to the local vicar, and you jolly well come and do something. So he came into this room, and he sat here, and he did a service of some kind. I don't even recall what he said or did. But the next day, Conan Doyle's eldest daughter phoned us from London to say, he's going to tell us what's going on. We've all gone peaceful. He's never appeared or interfered anywhere that we know of again.
Well, one cause of a haunting that we've come across seems to be related to unfinished business. Sometimes they seem to be coming back with some kind of message or some kind of need to complete some sort of action. For example, in the movie Ghost, the entity was coming back because he was concerned that his girlfriend was in danger, so he had to complete the action of resolving that issue before he could move on. We've had cases involving people hiding things. A mother hid her jewelry in one case in the wall in the house, and she kept coming back trying to get her family members to go find the jewelry, but most of them just kept getting frightened when she would appear, and so she couldn't really complete the action. But eventually one of them realized what she was trying to do, and she literally led that person to a place in the wall and told him to start digging through there, and he did, and he found the jewels. And once the jewelry was discovered, the haunting ended immediately. So we think that this is a basic category of the kinds of experiences we come across, where some unfinished business needs to be completed.
Yes, I was once called to a house where the night before the family had woken up thinking they were being burgled. And when the father opened the bedroom door, he found a group of people coming out of a wall, walking along the landing and disappearing out of another wall. And he said they were in old-fashioned dress and were carrying what looked like brown paper parcels. And he got the family out into the street and called the police. The police sent a van with a sergeant, a cadet, and a dog. And the dog refused to go into the house. So the sergeant turned to the cadet and said, right, lad, in you go, see what's happening. And he went up the stairs, not knowing what to expect, and saw exactly what the family had described, a group of people in groups of twos or threes, carrying what looked like these brown paper parcels and walking along the landing. When I got talking to the local priest, he said that they had a lot of problems with those houses in that particular area of the parish, and then he told me it was all built over a plague pit. And when I got talking to the family, I discovered that 3 months earlier they'd had a cot death. And that was the first night when the other children, the two children, had been moved back into their own bedroom from their parents' bedroom. And so it seemed to me that this was really a place memory, that they'd sparked off a memory from the past of people bringing their dead children to be buried.
In the summer of 1969, we were both on holiday with our two children in a little place called Altafulla. It was a medieval village in Spain about 7 miles north of Tarragona. And we were not staying actually in the village itself. We were just on the outside edge of it. It was a sort of walled medieval village, and we were staying just outside the wall in modern chalets. And after a normal day's holiday, we were sound asleep, very hot, so we're not wearing any night clothes. I think we just got a sheet over us. And the first thing I knew was I had a dig in the ribs for my wife, so she better tell you why she woke me up.
It's one of those occasions where you're very deeply asleep and something woke me, and I think it was whispering, but I can't even be sure. Just something woke me, and I looked, and right at the end of the bed, there were two men standing, looking straight at us and clearly discussing us. You know how people have their eyes sort of looking like that, but they're talking to each other. And I thought, gracious me, and I grabbed the bedclothes and hauled them up round my neck. That was the first instinctive thing, not to jump out of bed, but to actually cover myself up. And I banged Jerry in the ribs, you see, and he woke up.
Well, as I woke up, I looked up, and there, looking down at us, were two people, two men. They were standing fairly high up, as though they might have been standing on a table. And I usually wake up fairly promptly. I'm pretty clear when I wake up, and I could see them peering down, but I can only remember vividly their heads. I took in the rest of it, a sort of peripheral vision, and I tried to actually do a picture of this for you when I knew you were coming down. And I found in trying to do it, I could remember it as well as I could at the time. It was a long time ago, but I still got the same vision. But as soon as I started trying to make a picture of it, I was aware that the only thing I could really be clear about was the two heads. I wasn't really sure exactly what they were wearing, and we talked about it afterwards, and neither of us were, but we both had a strong feeling they were in some sort of medieval costume. It had that feeling of a period costume. They were looking down at us, talking. I didn't hear anything they said, but within a second or two it faded.
Were these two figures a place memory? Or since they appear to be whispering about what they saw, were they lost souls? Parts of the Bell Hotel overlooking the graveyard in Thetford date back to the 15th century. Guests and staff have many times reported seeing a young girl who suddenly disappears, and one story goes that a woman named Betty Radcliffe killed herself here because of the pain of unrequited love, but another tells that she was murdered and that her daughter, distraught with grief, hurled herself from an upper window. This room, number 10, now the honeymoon suite, has always had a reputation for being haunted. This man, who does not wish to be identified, spent his honeymoon in room 10.
Yeah, the first night we went downstairs to dinner, came back up, and there was a cold spot outside the door. As we came into the room, the door felt as if it was being pushed from the inside. It was rather, it was openable, but it was difficult to open it. We then came into the room, went to bed. We were lying there, and my wife pointed out there was a glow in the far corner of the mural on the wall, and she drew my attention to it. So I sort of fobbed it off, nothing, you know. And then we went back to sleep. I should think it was around about 3 to 4 a.m, and we heard footsteps running up and down the corridor outside the room. And then the footsteps came inside the room and were walking around at the bottom of the bed area. Later on that night, or later on that morning, a young girl appeared in the middle of the room, walked towards the window and disappeared. We then went back to a rather late sleep, and as I was laying there early in the morning, the sheets were lifted up over my face, which I then put back down. And then it was done about 3 or 4 times. I thought it was my wife, which it wasn't. because there was nobody there to do it. And it just happened. Next morning we got up and there was a handprint on the inside of the glass that covers the mural on the room wall. On the Sunday we came back from a day out and I went in the bathroom, had a bath, and the whole room went cold. My wife then told me that the actual bedroom had gone cold as well. I came out of the bath and sat on the bed watching the television. She went into the bathroom and the brass knocker on the wardrobe started to knock. At the same time, the aerial lead moved. We then heard the footsteps again. The footsteps were inside the room. We had there was an increase in temperature in the room, which was rather frightening. It was the worst bit of the experience, I think. It went up terrifically, and it was very difficult to breathe. We both got out. I think we had a drink of water, went back to bed, and then later on that night, I woke up and the girl was sitting on the side of the bed where I'd been sleeping. She got up, looked at me, kept a gaze on me, went round the end of the bed and disappeared near the window. The whole point of the story was that I didn't ever believe in anything like this. I'd never experienced anything like it in my life. My wife doesn't believe in ghosts. Neither of us are religious. As for the girl, she looked completely normal. She was not transparent. The only effect I think she had on us, or myself, was surprise. The fright came when she disappeared.
From this house in Grimsby, Robin Thurman leads a team who specialise in interacting with ghosts.
Well, our Ghostbuster team came about from a general interest and in fact from a very considerable demand. And we do have fun, you know. And in fact we've been castigated for that, as if we ought to be sort of po-faced about it. But why should we be? But we are perfectly serious in what we do. We certainly help people. I think you can, as people have done, spoken to any of the people that called us in, they're all happy, virtually 100% of them. So it's a good thing. We have fun, it's an interesting hobby, and we help people at the same time. Well, our car, you know, I mean, it's certainly not just a joke. We have great fun with it, but we need a big car. You see, it takes 3 very powerful batteries, and it's got enough room for probably 12 people, so we can get Ben, our big ghost hunting dog, in with all the team and, of course, all our equipment. We have the equipment takes up room as well as the batteries, you see. So it's a very valid piece of machinery. Well, the team consists, of course, myself. I'm the parapsychologist, the team leader. There's my son Andrew, who is an engineer. Janice Pattison, who coordinates the team, keeps us organised, and she's a microbiologist by profession. And Rodney Mitchell, who is a physicist and computer scientist, and he developed some of our most elaborate machinery, such as it is our Robo-Ghost, which has been written about in Micro User magazine, amongst other places. And we're all enthusiastic paranormalists, you might say. People sometimes ask us about Ben, our Newfoundland dog, which is our sort of, it's a mascot for the team, but also he's useful. He found the secret staircase at Grange Farm, after all. He drew our attention to this sort of area behind the wall. So he's useful as well as a mascot. And, you know, dogs are notoriously sensitive to psychical effects, so we like taking him along. On another occasion, I was told by some students that they'd had some frightening effects at an empty church. Well, a church which is still consecrated, a place called Skidbrook in Lincolnshire, which is a beautiful old church. Sadly, it has been vandalised, but the thing is, it's empty but consecrated. We went out there after they told us that they thought something nasty had been happening. Until they told me about it, I wasn't even aware that there was a church at Skidbrook. We got there to discover broken windows, black candles on the inside, emblems frequently associated with sort of demonic worship, inverted pentagrams and things like this. So there was certainly much activity of a sort of an unfortunate type going on out at that particular place. As the light began to fade while I was around here at the church, Rodney was outside, as I remember, with a torch, and he noticed that there were some disturbed tombstones. We turned the torches off. We didn't want to attract attention to ourselves from anything that might have existed or anybody that might be around at this stage, but we saw mist coming from the tombstones. Before we had a chance to examine this completely, Janice, who was waiting in the doorway of the church, told us the instruments were going wild. There were variations, wild variations in temperature. Looking back, we were horrified to see this mist arising from this very part. It blew towards us. We had to do something about it quickly. This is when we used the tractron beam. It was the most dramatic effect we have ever had from it. We fired the light into the mist, which seemed to shatter into billions of glittering lights, and with a whoosh, it rushed somehow out of the open doors which were over there. We were left in a completely empty and freezing cold building. After that, there was absolute silence. There was nothing to hear and nothing to see at all.
Well, the most interesting case we ever had was eventually made into a film called The Entity. And we experienced a plethora of phenomena during that investigation. Things kept happening every time we went back to the house. I was standing in the kitchen one night and a lower cabinet door slammed open. A pan came flying out. The trajectory of the pan was elliptical. It landed about 4 feet from the cabinet. I was standing right there. And a little later in our investigation, lights started appearing on the wall, big, bright lights. They would get bigger and brighter and brighter. And eventually, they pulled off the wall into the middle of our room and started spinning and twisting in different directions. They had full parallax. We could see them from all sides. I had 9 professional photographers in the room at the time. We were shooting it from every angle. It was very much like a laser light show. It was absolutely extraordinary. We'd sealed off the doors. We'd sealed off the windows. We were shooting in the dark, yet this light was lighting up the room. Quite often she reported seeing something when we didn't, but many other times we were seeing balls of light at the same time that everybody else was. In fact, we had over 30 witnesses seeing these balls of light moving across the room. At one point, the ball of light coalesced into a head, and then shoulders started to form, and it extended down to the ground, and we were all practically in shock as this figure was forming. And the moment it formed, it just went out, just like that, as if somebody pulled the plug or something. The energy just disappeared. Well, all the phenomena was directed at her. She claimed that she was attacked and raped by this entity, and she described the entity. We were never present when she was attacked, but there were big black and blue marks all over her body. There were bite marks on her neck and bite marks on her breast. She was severely attacked, but as to what attacked her, I was never there, so I don't know. During the entity case, we were witnessing a plethora of phenomena. Lights were flying all over the room. And when we would come back to the university and tell our colleagues about this, they would tell us we were hallucinating. So we would, of course, try to photograph these lights. And we finally were able to get a photograph of a light moving across the room. We shot in total darkness without flash. And here's the picture. And as you can see, there's a tail behind it and a light moving across the frame. This was shot without flash. The frame should be completely dark. We have another picture that we shot without flash in total darkness again. This whole picture should be black, but clearly some kind of light has exposed our film, and this was the light we were seeing moving across the room. Now this picture is the most important picture to me. What you see in this picture are reverse arcs of light. Right here you see one arc going this way, and over here you see another arc going the opposite way. And underneath this arc is the woman who claimed that she was being attacked in this house. And as you can see, she's ducking down in this picture, because what we were experiencing at this time were flying, spinning, swirling balls of light moving across the room. They didn't look like arcs, they looked like fully dimensional balls of light. Now if you look closely at this arc, it's floating in space. How do we know that? Well, if it were on the wall, her head would block out part of the arc, but it doesn't. And if you look at the other arc, it's also floating in space. If it were on the wall, it would be bent because these two walls are perpendicular here. The arc isn't bent, it's floating in space. And why is this important to us as researchers? Because the skeptic always says somebody in the room is faking it. If they were projecting light, they would have to project it onto a flat surface like a wall. But this is dimensional light floating in space, and it's very difficult to fake something like that. You would need a very sophisticated, high-powered laser system to fake something like this.
A photograph of a little girl in a bush was found when a man came to photograph the hunt in the New Forest. And when he developed it, there's a little girl about 8-10 years old standing in a bush, extending her arms out as though she's asking for help, and she's dressed, we decided, in a 1820 costume. This was brought to me by the vicar. I said, well, we know nothing about her, we'll have to have a service for her. She's obviously lost, or she wouldn't appear. And so we had a Eucharist of this nature, Requiem Mass, or whatever we like to call it, and she's never appeared since, in any photos that have been tried.
This photograph was sent to us by a woman who had a photograph taken on the London Underground, and when it came out, at the back of the photograph, in the window, is a picture of a man in an electric chair. Well, this was quite astounding, because at first we thought it might be a poster, but it was taken in the tunnel, so it couldn't be a poster. And what is more, it is up against the glass, because you can see the sparks, and the actual upright, the wooden upright, appears to overlap the sparks. So it must be right up against the window, so it couldn't be a poster. When I went to see the woman and questioned her, I asked her about her interests, and she said her interest was criminology. So I thought perhaps we had some thoughtography going on here of transferring thoughts onto photographs. But we eventually found that this man at the back sitting in an electric chair was the man who was electrocuted for the kidnapping of the Limburg child. And that model, as we see it here, is actually in Madame Tussauds, which is a very famous waxworks. And Madame Tussauds is actually built on top of the Bakerloo line, the underground line, where this photograph was taken. The negative is interesting here. It's taken on a 110 camera, and they're very small, as you see the negatives, and it's the third one down. So if it was any question of faking, it would be almost impossible to fake on a negative strip. And anyway, if anybody was really up to it, would they fake on a 110, such a small negative anyway? Here we have a photograph taken by a lady in a private wood in England, and one photograph is of the couple standing together. The other photograph is the couple standing apart, taken almost immediately after one another. And here, quite clearly, you can see a partial apparition of a person encircling the girl. We have the negative for that as well, also on a strip, not been interfered with. This is a photograph of a small child taken by its father in Covent Garden. And there was nothing remarkable about just the photograph itself until we looked into the corner. And there in the corner here appears to be a figure floating across without any legs. Here you see a blow-up of that particular part of it. Here again, it is part of the strip of a negative, so there's no question of any faking going on. It has been asked whether the girl was just running, but if she's running, she must be running very, very fast, right in front of the mother and of course that's the mother and the child in the background there. The mother says that there was nobody running across there, but even assume that somebody had, she would have been seen, and she must be running very fast, but there's a chain across there at the back, so the figure must have had to sort of come round in a circle and out. And at that speed, running forward with the hands in pockets is very, very unlikely situation. Besides, what's happened to the legs? Here we have probably the most incredible photograph of the lot, also on a strip of negative, not interfered with. This is a particularly interesting story attached to this one, is that a party of people were on holiday in the Austrian Tyrol, and their last night they decided they would have a meal together, and at the end of the meal they were in the hotel, there was some entertainment going on. One of the party said, "I'll take a photograph of us all." So he put the camera on automatic in a table in front of their table, went back to his seat and waited for the camera to flash. Well, the camera went off, but it didn't flash. So he immediately got up, went back to the camera to see why it hadn't flashed, couldn't find anything wrong, reset it to a 10-second interval, went back to the table, sat down, and the photograph flashed, the camera flashed. They then, when the holiday was over, they had a look through, didn't notice anything particular, put the photographs away. About a month later, one of the other ones at the party came along, had said, "Can I have a look at the photographs you took on the holiday?" He said yes, and she was looking through them, and she suddenly said, "Well, who's that?" Well, who's that was this. This is the second photograph taken with the flash, and you can see that's a perfectly normal photograph. This is the first photograph taken without the flash, and in the centre there you'll see quite clearly an extra person seen through the glasses. It's not a double exposure. There's nothing that has not been interfered with at all. It's been looked at very, very carefully. There is no explanation for that photograph whatsoever. It appears to be, and I would say, it's an apparition. Well, we believe that there are lots of photographs like this around, but people just dismiss them as aberrations, don't take very much notice of them. It's only when they can come to us for analysis that we can really look at them carefully.
But a photograph will never be proof. We don't consider what we're doing as proof of anything going on. We consider it just gathering evidence. We're just investigating the phenomena and doing our best to provide evidence that something objective was going on, that it wasn't just mere hallucination, illusion, or fraud, but that rather something is real out there in the environment, and we're trying to document it with whatever physical equipment we can use.
Back at the Bell in Thetford, Howard Wilkinson, physicist and psychic researcher, sets up his equipment to detect a paranormal presence.
Well, the box of tricks is really a glorified burglar alarm, split into two parts, if you like. Like any burglar alarm, it has things attached to it that sense the environment for movement, and in this particular instance, temperature change and so on. And if anything is detected as changing in the environment, then it switches to record mode. Basically, the machine is controlled by a small computer. That allows me to put different programs into depending on the environment, the area that we're working in. The printer here records the data when there is an event. The audio recorder there, that's used for programming the machine and for recording sound, obviously. And I have here some odd devices like magnetic sensors, because there is some evidence that perhaps the geomagnetic field may have some influence on the happenings in a room like this. There's a device for taking the temperature of the environment, so I have 4 sensors that I can spread around the room on long wires. Then moving to the recording side, really, there's a video camera on a stand there. We have a couple of 35mm cameras, only one of which is shown, which is behind me here. And I have also got rigged up an acoustic device which detects movement, or can be used to record sound, or rather detect sound, so that it would switch on and act like a voice switch, if you like.
With the equipment in place, Howard's colleague, parapsychologist Tony Cornell, settles down to pass the night in the haunted room. An image-intensifying lens allows the camera to see in the dark.
In the past, we'd been to these haunted houses, been along with a notebook and a camera, thermometer, and half of us have gone to sleep at 4 o'clock because nothing happens. Most of us go along to these houses and there's been the ghost seen the day before, and the day before that we go, nothing happens. Here's a psychic researcher begging to see a ghost and saying, look, come, my friend, whatever they want, I'll photograph you, I'll help you, whatever, and they don't turn up. The proof that I would like would be for a cooperative ghost to stand in, say, that corner every Wednesday night at exactly 10 o'clock, and we could come in and we could measure it with all our normal 5 senses. If we ever get it on film, I'm quite sure somebody will say, how did you fake it? Well, I think one of the nearest experiences I've had of seeing a ghost was when a lady rang me up and said, would you come and look at a ghost in my house? And I said, yes. I have to bring an undergraduate with me. She said, okay, and we made an appointment. The undergraduate, in actual fact, couldn't come at the time. Neither he nor I knew exactly what the ghost was until we got there. I got there, the lady gave me tea, she said that sure enough, the ghost would appear. It did for her, but I didn't see it. She was giving me a description, and she said, oh, Mr. Cornell, you must be able to see it. I couldn't see a thing. Then I heard her suddenly say, oh, hello, and I thought she was probably seeing another ghost, but it wasn't. It was the undergraduate who'd come to the house, knocked on the front door, no answer, saw us talking at the bottom of the hall, walked down the hall, hesitated, and then thought, well, okay, I better go on, because he saw a man with a pipe calling like this. When he got to the door, he pushed through between the lady and myself, and I said, my God, to him, you know, your manners are pretty bad. She'd gone off and said she'd get another cup of tea. It boiled down to the fact that she had given me a description of the ghost when he was something like about 10 miles away, 9 or 10 miles away, so he couldn't have known anything about it. She told me that the ghost had ginger hair, wore a green smoking jacket, grey flannel trousers, and had a pipe in his hand. Now, this lad, when I got him out in the garden and said, look, what was all this? He was saying, where was the husband? I said, what do you mean, the husband? He said, the husband, the man with the ginger hair and the green smoking jacket. You see? Now, that's fascinating, because she sees it, I don't see it, and he comes without any knowledge at all and sees the ghost.
Meanwhile, in Lincolnshire, at Pump Cottage, recording equipment is being installed by the Grimsby Ghostbusters at the site of a particularly baffling case.
It came to a high spot, I suppose, over a period of 2 to 3 months, but it really culminated in the one evening. It was just gone midnight, and we'd just settled down to go to bed, and the children were in bed, and I say it was just past midnight, and then all of a sudden there was a loud crash of a door. Now, this is the bedroom that's the smaller of the 2 windows on the roof. I got up, my wife was petrified under the covers, didn't want to know, but I got out of bed. The elder of the 2 children was screaming. He couldn't make any sense of anything he was saying. He was just screaming in bed. I went in, and as soon as I opened the door, he stopped. He turned to me and looked and laughed and started laughing. It's very unnerving. The crash of the door had split the door, not from top to bottom, but maybe 2/3 of the way down, and completely ripped the latch off the inside of the door. The night before we rang the vicar was most probably the most terrifying night I've ever spent anywhere in my life. Again, it was early hours of the morning, I don't know the exact time, but the whole room was as though there was an electric charge. Everything was just swirling round our heads. It was, you knew there was something there, but you couldn't touch it, or you couldn't. It was very uncanny, very frightening. I've never been frightened. It got to a point right at the end where my wife wouldn't go anywhere in the house on her own, even to the toilet. There had to be someone stood just outside the door. We had the 2 dogs. When we first moved in, they were fine. After a period of months, they became thin, nervy, dirty indoors. We had to get rid because they were just going crazy. Since then, we've had another one, and this one is going exactly the same way. This is our bedroom where we've had the sighting, which appeared from this side of the room was as to come through the window, along the bed, and out through that wall. That's the only sighting we've had. No problems, no scares, nothing. It was just a figure.
We just had a quite impressive change on the computer of light and heat intensity, which normally we don't get. You know, it's quite a thing really, because it shows something's going on today. You know, we've got good results. We're quite pleased with them, and we're going to run the computer some more and see what we can get, because it's impressive stuff. You know, the computer's showing changes immediately, and many different kinds. Normally, it's not quite this quick on reacting. You know, so it shows there is something powerful going on.
Yeah, it stopped again. This is very strange because it's getting a strange variety of problems and error messages coming out. There's nothing consistent or normal about this.
When you were discussing the computer, Jill came up the stairs and mentioned about the smoke that she could smell. I didn't personally smell it then, but
no, certainly no smell of smoke or burning in here, was there?
It's the aromatic look I was telling you, Andrew, the aromatic smell.
We've just been discussing that fact, you know, and then the computer played up, and say Jill came upstairs.
Yeah.
And so she could smell the smoke.
Jana smelled it.
Did synchronicity.
Did she?
Downstairs. Well, what we've seen this afternoon is very interesting, isn't it? Because when we came out to investigate and do some recorded evidence about it, we didn't particularly expect that anything would occur. We expected perhaps late at night when things are very quiet and things happen. But no, the computer has recorded some very interesting anomalous effects you don't expect to find, and they were particularly interesting. As we noticed early on, they were associated with an effect noticed by Jill downstairs and Janice of the team, that they smelt smoke, which has been reported in this house. And when they came up, we hadn't smelt it here, but the computer had recorded an effect. So I think we have something very significant here.
Poltergeist, we are fairly certain, is a purely psychological phenomena, but it's a very frightening phenomena. It begins normally with raps and knockings and footsteps, and then builds up into interference with electricity, and then into objects disappearing and reappearing, and then to objects flying around. So it can be a very violent activity, but we believe that it's not caused by an evil spirit that is coming and throwing things around, but is caused by a disturbed person, often a teenager, but not always, a disturbed person who's crying out for help, so all the anger and aggression and guilt inside them is building up and finding its outlet in causing this energy, which we call psychokinesis, that makes things move. Some psychiatrists say that it's really an alternative to a nervous breakdown.
And then you have a poltergeist of a different sort. That is a poltergeist that we cannot find associated with anybody in particular. So we don't know whose mind, if it's from anybody's mind, that poltergeist associated with.
A poltergeist seems to be mischievous children who are on the other side, who are getting a bit annoyed that no one has recognized them, and they'll throw something and saying, well, if you don't believe I'm here, listen to this or look at that.
It's violent, it throws things around. The interesting thing about it is that it never causes any really serious physical damage.
And also on one occasion I had a person who was quite good at controlling it. She began to come to terms with the fact that this was her and not anything evil, and that when she was particularly upset that this kind of activity would take place. So I arranged for her to see a counsellor, and when we first went to visit the counsellor, the parking meters outside had been changed from 10 pence pieces to 20 pence pieces, and we didn't have a 20 pence piece. And she said, don't worry. And she just looked at the parking meter, and just by looking at it, moved the needle and gave us 2 hours on the clock.
In 1977, Maurice Gross and journalist Guy Playfair investigated one of the most celebrated poltergeist cases of recent times in Enfield, North London.
It was interesting from the point of view that the media and various other people like police and council employees had already been called in, and they were unable to give any explanation as to what was happening in that house. And when eventually the Daily Mirror rang the society and asked us to come in and try and sort it all out, that I was sent to the case by the secretary because I'd been asking for a case. And when I got there, I realised we had a real case on our hands. The case started, as far as I know, in August the 31st, 1977, when the mother actually experienced furniture moving around and knocking.
Came home from work one evening and the wife said to me, when you finish your supper, go down to your sister's, her furniture's moving. I carried on eating my supper, thinking to myself, there's got to be a joke here somewhere in this statement. And when I'd finished, the wife said, well, are you going down or not? I said, you serious? She said, yes. And I got up thinking, silly cows on the booze. And I walked down the road, saw my sister, said, you got a problem? She said, yes, come with me. Took me upstairs and she showed me this very, shall we say, large, old type sideboard. She said it moves, and I could see she was worried, and I had to say something, and I said, oh, it's vibration. We came downstairs, and she said, so you reckon it's vibration? And she pointed to the ceiling and said, is that vibration? And it was a sound of like a squad of Coldstream Guards marching on parade. I said, yes, girl, don't worry about it. I come out and I thought, weird.
And I started to investigate, and as time went on, I experienced psychokinetic activity, that's things flying around, small things, later on heavy furniture. Later on we had fires, small fires broke out, and then water phenomena, that is water appearing from nowhere. We had writing on the walls. We had various things that usually happen in poltergeist cases, but not all together. In this case they happened all together.
I think the only thing that didn't get smashed was the television, but everything else did. And mind you, it is a bit off-putting when you see your first settee float up the wall and hover under the ceiling, and you think to yourself, bloody hell, that's a good trick. I wonder how that's done. But a little later you realise it ain't a trick, because you see so many things like this happen.
The case surrounded the mother, 2 daughters and 2 sons. The daughters were 12 and 11, and the sons were 10 and 7. The second daughter we considered to be the epicenter of the whole case. In other words, she was the one that most of the activity surrounded.
Leaving the room one night, Janet was on the settee, and suddenly she moved. She came up about 12 inches, and she was literally thrown at me in the doorway. I went up one way, she went the other. I laid on the floor thinking, Christ, they're never going to believe this in casualty. Got up thinking of Janet, thinking she'd been hurt, but she was still asleep. And we put her back on the settee.
Levitation was something that was hotly discussed in the case, because here we had 2 independent witnesses outside in the street who actually saw Janet floating round the room, followed by various things, books and pillows, floating around after her.
My brother-in-law turned up and said, what's all this rubbish about Peggy and her bleeding poltergeist? I said, come with me. We goes down to my sister's. She was in the house. I said, look, Peg, David, can I bring him in? She said, yeah, come in. Everybody else is here. You bring him in. We walked in the room. Everything was tipped over the floor. Total chaos. And he went, oh, my God, what's all this? And sitting in the chair was one of her children. And suddenly the chair moves with a child on it. Well, poor Dave, he just couldn't believe what he was seeing. He just backed off. And the funny thing was that when he backed off, he goes to open the living room door, and the door handle broke. Now, to this day, I don't know what frightened him more, the child moving in the chair or the door handle breaking his hand. He come out, poor bloke was petrified.
The mother and the girls had told us time and time again that when they were in bed at night, very often, the bedclothes used to fly up off the bed on the wall. We actually have a photograph of the bedclothes going up the wall near the window and the curtain billowing out into the room. And you can see them drop down again, and Janet's just lying in bed there with her hands across her stomach, and Margaret's in a separate bed. They're not doing anything.
And when I went there, I only had 14 hours, but I went with Alan Gould. We both got a bit of experience in the field, and all we could see were 3 children taking the researchers for a ride. Now, we were never allowed into the bedroom. We had to stand outside outside the door. and there's all hell let loose. So you go in and there's a girl saying, "It happened again," you know, with smiles all over her face.
And then, of course, came the most controversial part of the whole case, where the voice spoke through the girl.
Gestalt, 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 Gestalt. Mr. Clyford, Mr. Fairplay, Mr. Dogface.
Now, this girl used to speak up to 3 hours at a time, not continuously, of course, up to 3 hours at a time, without once clearing her throat.
Days before I died, I went blind. Then I had an hemorrhage, and I fell asleep, and I died in a chair in the corner downstairs.
I think that probably in the early days there may well have been a genuine poltergeist outbreak there.
Skeptics, yes, I've had plenty of trouble with skeptics, but as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't worry me. Their skepticism doesn't mean anything, because we know what we experienced, and that's the end of the story as far as we're concerned.
Getting rid of ghosts is a serious business.
Exorcism is really only appropriate with people, and then only appropriate in very few cases. Those of us in the Church of England who are involved in this work say that it's about 1 case in 500 where we would carry out an exorcism, because most people need counselling or forgiveness, or they need to be blessed or healed. They perhaps don't need to be exorcised.
Very eminent exorcists say that it can very often make it worse, and I've heard of many cases where it has made it worse.
Every bishop appoints specialists in the paranormal, people who are used to dealing with unusual problems about ghosts or possession or people who've been involved in the occult, and they will normally have authorised priests with some sort of psychological training to deal with this ministry. So most people who are troubled end up by going to see their local priest, and the local priest will then investigate the case and report it to the bishop, and the bishop will then appoint another priest to follow it up. So help is always available.
Dr. Kenneth McCall is convinced that we are often haunted by the ghosts of our ancestors who remain unblessed. By drawing up a family tree and holding a religious service, he believes he can liberate their souls from their tormented state and bring peace to the living.
Satan, who, according to the books, was Lucifer, who came out from heaven. He tried to usurp God's place and brought millions of angels along with him, that they do try to interfere and do sometimes imitate lost souls to annoy us. But I find that in exorcism that they're very easily dealt with, because the Lord's Prayer itself is an adequate exorcism, and they can't stand any of the phrases of the Lord's Prayer. They just turn and buzz off.
There are a lot of people, I think, who won't believe until they can see or touch or feel or hear for themselves. And I can understand that, because my own, that's where I come from. I mean, I don't easily believe. I tend to need a fair bit of proof before I'm prepared to accept what's going on. And it's simply in dealing with hundreds of these cases or thousands of these cases that I've come to acknowledge that the paranormal really does exist and that extraordinary things do happen.
Whatever the evidence, there will always be those who believe in ghosts and those who don't. Maybe it's here we will all find out the truth about ghosts.